So Book of Ruth, chapter 1 is where we're going to start. We're going to be reading the first 5 verses of chapter 1 of Ruth 1. We're going to, again, we're not going to read through the whole thing, but we're going to see a few pieces here and there as we just take the opportunity this morning to reflect on the life of Ruth in some ways and what we can learn from her. And it's kind of ties into our title for what we've titled this morning. So let me read these first 5 verses. Kind of introduces us to exactly what's going on. So starting at Ruth 1, verse 1, it says, "Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. And a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrates of Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to the country of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. Now they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. So the women survived her 2 sons and her husband." As we look at Ruth's story, just the introduction brings us to the point of introducing this family. And it introduces this family that they had to move. And they moved out of their homeland to go to another homeland. Not another homeland. They moved out of their homeland to go to another land because it was too difficult to live where they were at. I mean, the whole area, and that's not to say that this other area they moved to was necessarily in a perfect condition either, because the lands were experiencing famine. They were going through difficulty. There was lots. I mean, they were leaving to go be able to eat. And I don't know if they're looking for work, but they were looking to, we don't have any food to eat here. We're not going to survive in the place that we're at. We're going to go look for a new place to live, to survive through these difficult times. They get to this area and they settle in a new area called Moab as a family. And then the father of this family passes away. Elimelech dies. And he still has, his wife survives him. He has 2 sons that are left. The 2 sons, they're in this new land. It's not their homeland, but they both find wives. And they marry and they start building families of their own. They find these wives, they get married, they start their own life there in this new land. And then crazy, both of the sons pass away as well. And we step into the story at this point where Naomi, the matriarch of the family, the wife that moved to this new land, her and her 2 daughter-in-laws are the only ones left out of this family. All of the men have passed away in this family. So the story opens with immense loss for Naomi and consequently for Ruth and for Orpah. A famine had forced the family to move. Death had struck all of the men of this family. Obviously, we look at this. This is not a minor setback that this family was dealing with. This isn't we think of some of the things we go through, and some of us, we've been at this point. Maybe not the famine part, but we've been at the loss moment. We've been in times of difficulty. This is obviously not an insignificant setback in this life. This is really, in their lives, this is like a complete devastation of their family and their structure and their security, especially when you understand how the world worked at that time. How the world worked at that time, the men, they're the ones that were able to work, and they were able to provide for their families. The structure of their culture wasn't really built for women to survive on their own at this time. That wasn't really how culture was built at that time in this area of the world. So without having the father, without having the husbands of these 2, the 2 daughters, daughter-in-laws, it's there wasn't really a way for these women to be provided for in this moment. We're not going to read down the story, but I will paraphrase parts of it. And we're going to jump to little pieces of each chapter. But after this happens, after all of the men of this family are lost and they're in these moments of struggle, their difficulty, they're having to reel and deal with the loss of them. They decide to leave this new land that they were in. They're in the land of Moab right now. They had left Israel. They had gone to Moab. And now in the light of losing the men of this family, they're like, well, we're going to go back to Naomi's. Well, Naomi wants to go back to her homeland. She's like, well, I'm leaving this place that we came to. I'm going to go back to my homeland. There's a talk between them. She's talking to her daughter-in-law. She talks to Orpah. She talks to Ruth. And she tells them, she's like, we're probably not going to make it really. It's like, how are we going to, provide for ourselves, as kind of, I guess, women in this culture. She's like, she makes the suggestion to them. She's like, you guys should go back to your families. Like, you've lost your husbands. And you think about this. This is, they were married to their husbands for 10 years as well. It wasn't just like some short-lived relationship. They were married for 10 years to their husbands as well. And Naomi tells her daughter-in-law, she's like, you need help. You should go back to your homelands, go back to your families. You should go back to your family's households, because at least there it makes sense. You would be provided for in that place. When she makes that recommendation, Orpah takes her up on that. She's like, okay, I am going to go. I'm going to go back to my family's household. I'm going to go there. But we're going to see, that Ruth makes a different decision. And Naomi, again, she's made the decision she's going to go back to Israel, and Ruth is going to go with her. Ruth has decided that she's going to go with her, but Naomi doesn't sugarcoat over the difficulty that she's going through. When she goes back to Israel, she goes back to Bethlehem, she tells people there, she tells them of, or really how she describes it, the bitterness that is inside of her. She literally tells them to call her by a different name, because her name is Naomi, and she goes, and when she moves back, she says, call me Mara, which is interesting because I believe, which I'm trying to remember now, I believe the name Naomi means like sweetness, something like that. It means sweet or sweetness. And she says, call me Mara, which means bitter. She has a name that means sweet, but she goes back and says, call me now bitter, because life has been so hard for me. And she's really like, the Lord has taken everything away. She goes back to these people. She says, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. She acknowledges really the difficulty and the bitterness of her experience. But Ruth, by consequence, is experiencing all this as well. She was there she was there like living with this family, part of this family, and she loses her husband too. After 10 years of marriage, she loses her husband. And by society's standards, she's really empty too, because, where's her provision coming from? Where's her household is broken. And I think of this, and I look at this story, and I think of, this concept of resilience through life experience. For all of us, every single person in this room, life has been different. Well, there's nobody here that we have the exact mirror of life and experiences and happenings that the next person has gone through. But every one of us, I know to some degree, has experienced significant setbacks in our life. Maybe even in an analogy sense, maybe we've experienced those famines that they've gone through. Maybe we've experienced the loss has been gone through. Maybe we've gone through seasons of lack. Maybe we've gone through seasons of being spiritually dry. Maybe we've just been emotionally exhausted. Maybe we've gone through grief or disappointment or unmet expectations, broken relationships, health challenges. Even as we think of mothers today, maybe it's even there's been difficulty in, raising our child the way that we wanted to, and the difficulties that even being a mom brings to the table at times. Maybe there's the heartache of rebellion, or just, sorrow of seeing a life not lived in the right way. Maybe we've even as parents and parents, maybe we've given up a lot of things for our own dreams and aspirations, because we want to see the best for our children. Maybe there's just so many different things. For everyone, maybe we've experienced job losses, financial strain, like betrayal of friends or family, personal failures. Maybe we've gone through chronic illness, the death of loved ones. Like there's so many things that are part of all of our stories as individuals. And all of us have gone through just different things, but we've all gone through something. Like Naomi, and I think this is something that sometimes even like when we come to church, we don't, I think so many of us, we hold back at times, I think, when we're going through difficulty. Like Naomi, it's okay to acknowledge that there's hardship happening right now. It's okay to be able to tell the people around us that there is difficulty. Resilience, when we talk about resilience, resilience isn't pretending that everything is fine, but it's an honest engagement with what's really going on right now. Because, obviously when Naomi was kind of having her Mara time, when she's experiencing these things, like God can handle the Mara times of our life. God can handle the bitter and difficult times of our life. But so many times, I think even as community, we hold that back. Naomi put it out in the open so people knew what she was going through. And obviously Ruth was living it right alongside of her and decided to take the path with her. And we need to understand that, like, the difficulties. Again, we see Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah going through difficulties, but difficulties, especially when we start to understand life God's way. Like, difficulties aren't just like a detour we end up on. Difficulties are part of the path that God is taking us down. The difficulties aren't just interruptions in God's plan for us. Often they are the path that He chooses to draw us closer to Him. They refine our character. They prepare us for what's next. Our story with God includes hard chapters. And sometimes we have to be reminded to be able to see the value in what He brings to them. So again, we consider Ruth's story today when we consider resilience. Ruth faced emotional grief. She lost her husband. So Ruth faced widowhood in the culture of that world at that time, which was a difficult place to be. When she made this decision to go with Naomi, she faced being a foreigner in a foreign land. She was not native Israeli. She was a Moabite going to live in Israel. She faced poverty. They were making a lot of these decisions because they couldn't afford to eat, or there was no food available where they were at. Ruth, even as this, I think, fairly young woman at this time, Ruth was learning resilience through life experience. And I want to look at these verses further down in chapter 1. Look at verses 16 and 17. Because she's learning resilience through life experience, but there's another building block to her resilience, and that's resilience through faith. In verse 16 and 17 of Ruth chapter 1, again, this is when Naomi is talking to her daughter-in-law. She's like, you should go back to your homeland because it'd be way easier for you. But Ruth looked at her and said, entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. Ruth made a testimony of her loyalty to, at this point, it's her mother-in-law. But, I think she sees that she needs help, and she's like, I don't know, she had a great plan for her, and she decided not to go back to her family. But there's this testimony of loyalty. They're going through suffering together. They're dealing with this together. Ruth makes this powerful testimony, this powerful response. And the key element that brings resilience through faith in this response is that Ruth says, I'm going to follow your God too. And I don't know how Naomi has lived that out in front of Ruth, but Ruth is aware that you have a God that you follow that is not the God that my land has known. And I'm going to follow you. I'm going to go with you. I'm going to do these things with you. And part of that is I'm going to follow the God that I know that you follow. But there's something very important to notice that too, in this too. Ruth didn't just decide to, like, I'm going to follow God when everything was great and golden and nothing has gone wrong up to this point. Ruth has decided, I'm going to follow after your God after all of the devastation already occurred. She decided to follow God in the wake of all of the adversity and difficulty. And because of that, because of this new faith that Ruth has, because of her decision to follow after the God of Naomi, this book becomes a testimony. The whole book of Ruth becomes a testimony of how God guided and provided for these two vulnerable women. This book doesn't detail like every internal and external struggle that they went through. You get to see a lot of it. But you see in this book that Ruth placed her faith in God. It would have seemingly made more sense logically and culturally, go back to your family, start a new life. Like that'll be way easier for you to do. But Ruth took a step of faith and says, I'm going to go with you and I want to know your God. This wasn't just loyalty to Naomi, it was a conscious decision to embrace the God of Israel, and this is the foundation of her journey of faith. And following Ruth's pledge to go with Naomi and to follow God, they took this trip to Bethlehem. And it's interesting, the book, it gives specific details. It says that they arrived, by God's providence, right at the beginning of the harvesting of barley, which is like, well, why does it matter? They show up at the beginning of the barley harvest. But they're still grieving their losses. They've expressed their bitterness. And Ruth takes it upon herself. She's like, we need to eat. Like, we're back in this country. Like, I don't know these people. Like, this is new land for me, but we need to eat. I believe at this point, Naomi has probably shared even some of the culture with Ruth and like maybe how they could be provided for. But Ruth seeks permission to go glean from the farm fields. And that was part of the culture. If you go all the way back in the Old Testament to Leviticus and the law at that time, there was this law put in place to the farmers that says, go harvest your fields, but don't take every last little scrap out of your fields. Leave some of the harvest, leave some of the harvest in your fields so that the people that need, the widows and the needy in the community, that they would be able to freely go out to these fields and still find some food to eat. That's a cool part of their culture. Like God put in this provision, take your harvest, make your money from it, do your business, all of those things. But make sure you remember you need to take care of the people of your land too. So leave a little bit available so that somebody like Ruth in their situation could come and be provided for. Ruth sought permission to go glean the fields, and by God's providence, she happened, again, I don't believe in coincidence, she happened to land to begin gleaning the fields in the fields of a man named Boaz, which happens to be a relative of the late husband of Naomi. Ruth diligently worked. She was she was getting food for the both of them. Boaz comes out to his property and some of the men inform him of who she is and what she's doing. He inquires about her. The foreman of the farm tells him about her and her efforts. And then Boaz goes and he talks to her directly. But you see in this, Ruth took action. And she followed Naomi. She took it upon herself. I need to help. I need to be part of this. I'm going to take action. I know God has provided this law that says that people can go out to the fields and can get some food. She doesn't just sit back. She goes out to begin doing what she needs to be doing. And this shows she's heard what God has said. She's trusting him. She believes that God will provide for her and for Naomi, even through this humble act of she's going out, probably hands and knees and working in these fields and so that she can eat with her and her mother-in-law. I think sometimes we forget that God he promises us provision. He promises us that he will take care of us. He promises us that he will provide for our needs. But sometimes I think we forget that we need to get started walking down the path that he has laid out for us, because his provision lies on the path of action that he has told us to be on. We can't just sit back and just be like, God, I'm waiting for the provision. Like, he's told us what to do. In this situation, he has provided a way already. He says he's provided this law where there's a way for them to go get food. But Ruth didn't just sit back and wait for somebody to do that for her. She took the step. She asked Naomi, can I go? What fields can I go to? Where should I go? She goes out and she talks to these farmers. Can I take from these fields? And she begins to do it. And there begin to find provision in food, but also in more. And she talks to this man named Boaz. And I want to read Ruth 2, verses 11 and 12. Again, she's been out in the field. She's had this conversation with Boaz. She's met this man. This man has heard a little bit about her. He's come to understand a little bit about who she is and what she's doing. But look at verses 11 and 12 of Ruth chapter 2. So Boaz, now having a conversation with her, Boaz answered and said to her, it has been fully reported to me. He's heard about her now. He's heard the story. All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. Again, she's struggling too, and yet she's taking care of Naomi. And how you have left your father and your mother and the land of your birth and have come to a people whom you did not know before. He says, the Lord repay your work and a full reward be given to you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Boaz heard her story. He saw what she was doing. He saw what God was doing in her. He saw that she made this decision to come under the protection and provision of the God of Israel. He saw the faith that she was walking in at this moment. He makes this beautiful statement that you have chosen to come under the wings of God to find refuge. She was acting in faith that this new God that she knows in a land that she's not familiar with would come through, that he would provide for them, that he would come through for them, and he absolutely was. But we see in Ruth's character and in her story, one, that faith is an active choice. Like, she actively chose I am going to follow the God of Israel. I am going to move to this land with you. I'm going to do what he has told us to do. I am going to choose to serve someone else, even while she's going through difficulty too. She's making these active faith decisions. Our faith journey begins when we come to the moment of trusting Jesus Christ and following him in our individual lives. But that initial choice needs to be lived out daily through choices that we make and life that we live that hopefully align with his will and purposes. Resilience is built as we repeatedly choose God over fear, doubt, and worldly alternatives. Faith is an active choice. It's like we went through James a long time ago. Faith without works or without action is dead. Faith is to be lived out. Faith, like Ruth's experience, faith sometimes takes us out of our comfort zones. She had an easy path here. She had a path where she could have just went back with her family, just left Naomi to fend for herself, got provided for there, not gone to Israel, not followed the God of Israel. She had this seemingly easy path out. But faith in God and her desire to help Naomi took her out of her comfort zone. Ruth left her familiar world. True faith, it's happened for me a number of times in this life. Real faith in following God takes us out of our comfort zones, because usually he's at work when we're growing and when we're doing something different that he has called us to, and not just staying in our comfort zone. Faith is expressed through actions and obedience. We just talked about that. But faith finds refuge and finds strength in God alone. Again, Ruth had an opportunity to go find potentially everything she needed back at her family's house, but she chose God's path and serving Naomi and helping in this situation. She went to go find refuge under God's wings. And this heart of resilient faith, and a heart of resilient faith that we could have as well, knows that our ultimate security, strength, and hope is found in God's protective care and his ultimate power. And faith trusts that God has a plan. Ruth couldn't see the end. When she chose, I'm going to follow Naomi back into Israel, she didn't know what was coming. She didn't know what God had in store. Ruth couldn't see the end of God's plan, but faith trusts that God has a plan and that he's working it out. So again, when we think of this resilience that's building, we see this resilience building in Ruth. We see what she's going through. I think of our lives. We've built resilience we've gone through life experiences. We've gone through difficulty. It's like when we go through those situations, hopefully we come to the other side of it and we've learned something about it. We've learned something about ourselves. We've learned something about the goodness of God. We've learned practical things, even how we can help the next person as they're going through it. Like we gain resilience, we gain strength as we go through even difficult life experiences. And then obviously that's like the first building block, and then it gets massively amplified when that resilience is being built by faith in God, because he's so much stronger than what we could accomplish on our own. And we see that's a new thing for Ruth. It's something that she's walking in now. So we get resilience through life experience, resilience built through faith. Then I want to consider the legacy of resilience, the legacy of that. Like why? Why keep walking? Like why keep going? Like Ruth, you think about her story. She's living in this land and the father-in-law dies. She loses her husband. She's got no way to really provide for herself at this point. It's like, at that point, it's like almost like, why keep walking? Like, why keep moving? We see this moment, we just talked about this moment where Ruth had this initial meeting with Boaz. Ruth expresses just gratitude for Boaz's kindness and for his provision, because Boaz specifically went to all of his workers and says, you guys leave her alone. Like, don't make it hard for her. Make sure there is food on the land that she can take and that is available for her and her family. He shows this kindness. Ruth expresses gratitude for this kindness. He invites her to share a meal with him and his workers. He instructs them to treat her generously. When Ruth goes back, she tells her mother-in-law, like, I went out to this field and I met this man. And her mother-in-law is like, oh, I know who that guy is. He's actually a relative of my late husband. And there's an interesting thing, because in that culture at that time, there's this, I guess, concept of like how the culture worked at that time, where a man could be called, it's called a kinsman redeemer. It means a family member of, the husband that passed in the family, that he had another family member. And there was an opportunity in that culture for the family member to really now take that wife, to marry the wife of his previous family member, to continue the family line in that family and to provide for her, because she doesn't have provision without her husband anymore. And so part of the culture was, if a woman lost her husband and there was another man in that household, in that family, that was able to step in and fill that role, that he would step in as a kinsman redeemer. And he would protect that family's honor, property, their lineage. He would even buy back, land that the family had to help provide for the family. And so Boaz, being a member of this family line, had the opportunity to step in as a kinsman redeemer. And there's a whole picture, really a lot of this, in Boaz, there's this whole picture of Jesus as well, where, like Boaz was a member of this family, like Jesus stepped into kind of our family in the sense that he came down as a man to this earth. He stepped in as a man to this family to come to redeem us out of the terrible situation that we're in. So this picture in Boaz is he's able to step in now to provide and to redeem and to help Ruth. Again, it provides that. We're not going to go deep into that, but there's this real stark parallel of Jesus in the life of Boaz. But a number of things happen along this road. And, Naomi instructs Ruth in her relationship with Boaz and how to pursue the relationship. But the relationship happens. Boaz steps in as a kinsman redeemer. And again, now we think of legacy. Ruth has been living this life of resilience, and I think of even Mother's Day today. Obviously, up to this point, Ruth has not had a child up until this point. But she now is going to step into this relationship with Boaz, and there's an incredible story of legacy that comes out of the resilience of this woman and what she's gone through. I want to just read we're going to skip just to the last part of this book in Ruth chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. There's something super significant here in this passage. So starting in verse 13, Ruth chapter 4, it says, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And then he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, 'Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. And for your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is better to you than having 7 sons, has borne him.' Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became a nurse to him. And the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, 'This is a son born to Naomi.' And they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David." And I'll just read this little genealogy of this. It says, "Now this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Amminadab. Amminadab begot Nahshon. Nahshon begot Solomon. Solomon begot Boaz. Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David." We think of legacy. There's a bleak starting point in the story of this woman. Her story as we know it started in loss, difficulty, famine. Even during the time of the judges, it was a super unsettled time, even in just the entire region of just ups and downs and bad leaders and choices for the whole nation. And not to mention famine and all of these things going on. And then you bring into that individual family, and you get loss and grief and all of these things. And now for her living in a new land and all of these things, there's a bleak starting point to the legacy of this woman. And if you only looked at Ruth chapter 1, you see a childless Moabite widow from a group of people that is often at odds with Israel. She's impoverished. She's in a foreign land. Her prospects for leaving a significant positive legacy within Israel seemed virtually nothing. Her past and current circumstances were not promising, but choices were made. Her decision to cling to Naomi and to embrace God, her diligent work, her humble obedience, her virtuous character, these were all pivotal decisions. These choices rooted her in a growing faith and began to pave the way for a different future. God had a redemptive plan for her life and through her life. God, through the provision of Boaz as a kinsman redeemer, dramatically altered Ruth's story. This wasn't just about personal well-being, it was about lineage and legacy. For us, I think about this. Maybe we all have different stories. Maybe we had a difficult start. Maybe it's still been pretty difficult up until this point. A lot of people have lived lives in certain ways and have gone through certain things that maybe they feel they're inadequate for certain things or maybe unqualified for certain things. Maybe you feel like the life you've lived thus far disqualifies you from leaving a lasting godly legacy in a significant way. Perhaps there were years of unfaithfulness, bad choices, broken family, a lack of spiritual intentionality, but the whole point of this and what it stresses is that no matter how things have looked up to this point, because it looked pretty bad for Ruth, that there is still opportunity. The good news in the gospel of Jesus Christ is that there's always an opportunity for a new beginning for anyone. Today, even for us as followers of Jesus, is a new day to start making better or new decisions in our following of Jesus Christ to honor God. Our past doesn't have to dictate future legacy. Again, even I think of for mothers and for fathers anyways, Like maybe we haven't felt like we've been the perfect parent at this point. Maybe we feel like we've done well. Maybe we feel like we've really messed up. The thing is, we can still start today to do better with long-term benefits. We can begin today to intentionally live out the faith that we have before our children, and they will see the change and the sincerity that comes from that. True lasting legacy isn't about just modifying behavior. It's about a heart transformation that only Jesus can bring. When we surrender to him, the Holy Spirit works in us to make us more like Christ. And as a parent, we need that in us. We need that in us before we can encourage it for real in our children and with everyone else around us as well. For mothers and fathers, this is key. A legacy of godliness is intentionally passing on faith, values, and love for the Lord to the next generation. It involves more than just words. It involves living out and following God right in front of them. Ruth was doing that. And again, it's only at the very end of our story that we find out that she becomes a mother. But the crazy thing in Ruth's story is that genealogy at the very end of this tells us she is, math-wise, I believe she's the great-grandmother of King David. No idea at this point that this Moabite, she's a foreigner. She's not native to the land of Israel, but she yet becomes the great-grandmother of King David, and even bigger than that, because we know where David's family line goes. Being the great-grandmother of King David puts her in the family line of Jesus. There is crazy legacy that comes in her life because she chose God. She chose to follow him to these places, even in the wake of all of this difficulty. There's legacy in her life that's crazy. Who would think that this impoverished foreigner that comes to this land, that God would provide for her to take care of her and put her in the family line of King David and Jesus? Maybe things have been tough. Maybe they've been going okay. But I've always loved and appreciated the statement that says, if we're not dead, God's not done. Just like Ruth, we've got room to grow, change, and build godly legacy in this life. And not, please, not just to make a name for ourselves, but so that more people can see more of God in us. Ruth followed him into his plans and his purposes for her future. That's what we got to do. We got to follow him into his plans and purposes for our future and trust that he's got our best at heart. So I just encourage you guys. I've even seen it myself, just like ways, even considering these things this week and things that have happened and stuff, just ways that I can even do better as a father and discipling, my kids and being that example and teaching them directly these things as well. For mothers, I'd encourage that to be that example. But it's God's way. Even in that, it's not just making my kids happy and feel good. It is, they need to see God in me. They need to see that God's standards matter to me. They need to see that he loves them more than I do, and I'm going to love them the way that he loves them. And that's what's important. And so, like I said, even if we haven't been perfect up to this point, we still have an opportunity to leave a legacy of resilience and godliness, potentially even long after we're here, to live through the generations beyond us.